What's happening, guys? We're back and we're gonna build some jigs today. All right, we need to build, we need to build a jig for the chassis side mounts for our front suspension. But before we move on to that, I want to address a couple of comments you guys have made. They're really good comments, but we just need to kind of talk about them a bit. You guys are really concerned with the way that we built the lower control arms, particularly when I removed that brace that I had in here. So one of the comments was, when you're under high G loads, like hard cornering, the control arm that's on the outside wheel is going to be put under compression, and the one that's on the inside wheel is going to be put under tension. And when you put this under compression, it's going to try to spread these end mounting points apart, and that's going to load up these heim joints in the bad direction. The heims only really like to be loaded kind of axially. They don't like being loaded sideways because the ball tends to wear out and eventually pop right out. So there was a comment about that, about the concern under hard cornering. This is a road car, so it's not going to see a whole lot of really high cornering loads. It's running street tires, so it'll probably just break traction before it puts a whole lot of load on these. But we will keep an eye on it. If we do notice a lot of flexibility in these, we can always tack that thing back in and get rid of it. But removing it was done to take up that slight misalignment in the heim spacers. That's the other comment. You guys really didn't like that I was using the flexibility in my A-arm to take up some misalignment in my mounting points. There was some comments that, you know, we should just shim the mounting points so we don't have that misalignment. We are going to make the lower control arm mounts and the upper control arm mounts. We are going to make all those shimmable. We're going to actually probably add 1/2 inch on either side. I want to do that so that we can shim this thing forward and backwards to adjust our wheelbase and also our caster adjustments. So there is going to be shims. The issue that you run into with shimming a double shear mounting system is you can't shim it perfectly. If you shimmed it perfectly, you'd never be able to get the heim joint in because it'd be too tight. So there's always going to be a very slight amount of space there. Then when you tighten up those bolts, something has to flex, and it's in every mounting system out there. Normally the actual brackets, like the tabs that this thing mounts to, will flex slightly to take that up, and also a little bit in our arm. So I'm not real concerned about that. I'm not talking about taking up like 1/2 inch or 1/4 inch of misalignment and really squishing these things. It's going to be slight, so I'm not real worried. What else? Oh, there's a couple things that we can do if we do notice issues. One thing is we can take our heim joints right now are mounted vertically like this. We could take these and mount them horizontally like that, and that would take out that kind of that loading against the ball that heim joints are notorious for failing from. We could do that. I don't really like it because it really locks in your spacing, because wherever you put those holes in, you're kind of locked down. So if we start messing with any kind of adjustment on these things, you run out pretty quick. The other thing is we have to be concerned about how much articulation we can get out of this control arm. Because we're using heim joints and not like ball joints or something, they have a fairly limited range of motion. Yes, it's a street car, it's not like a big off-road dune buggy, so it would probably be okay, but we'd have to measure that and make sure. So we can do that if we need to. The other thing that we can do is take this kink out of the arms, so we could weld our threaded plugs in line with our tubes. That would get rid of a whole lot of that axial loading on these, or on the ball, loading it sideways. You get rid of a bunch of that. The issue with that is then any adjustment that you make to these heims every time you screw them in or out, it really affects the distance between your mounting points. So then you have to make them, you need to have a lot of adjustability in those lower mounts. So this is probably the least ideal way to mount these joints, but it's the best way for adjustability. And right now that's kind of what we're going for, because we're not 100% sure how this setup is going to perform. So I'd rather have a little bit of adjustability, get my setup locked down, and then once we have it locked down, if we notice that the heim joints are wearing out prematurely or binding or whatever it might be, we can address that then and change our design slightly, but we'll know what we want for a setup. So this is, in my mind, the best way to go about it right now. It's the worst way for the components that we're using, but it's the best way to get the car dialed in. So to account for that, we've just really upsized our components. We're using 5/8 heims on the lower control arms, which is way overkill. We could probably get away with, well, we could easily get away with 1/2-inch heims. There's a lot of guys building like dedicated track cars that are pulling really high G-forces with just 1/2-inch rod ends. So we're gonna keep trucking on this. If it does prove to be an issue, we'll change it. So this episode, I want to build a jig. We're going to build it out of MDF, just like our spindle jig. We have all the measurements for where we need those mounting points in the X and Y directions from our modeling that we did on the computer. So let's grab another chunk of MDF here, measure that all out, cut it up, and make a jig. I'd say that looks pretty good. One thing I do have to do though is I still want to be able to use my spindle jig here to kind of eyeball where the control arms are going to run, and it would have to slot underneath this jig. So I'm gonna mark this out and just trim 3/4 of an inch off the bottom up to about here. I still want the jig to run right down to the build table underneath the lower mounting point, just to give it a bit of stability. So we're probably gonna have to trim the spindle jig as well. But we got the saw out, so we might as well do it all now. Alright guys, we hit a bit of a snag here. Our upper control arms use these 5/8 by 1/2-inch heims. So they'll use a 1/2-inch through bolt in the bracket. but our lower control arms use a 5/8 by 5/8 tine. 5/8 by 5/8 tine. So they got quite a bit bigger through bolt. So I bought 5/8 inch bolts for them, but I didn't buy a 5/8 inch drill bit. So I wasn't able to drill out the jig to 5/8. And I won't be able to drill out any of the control arm tabs that we're gonna have to weld onto the chassis. I won't be able to drill those out. So we're actually at a bit of a stopping point on this project. We can't really mock anything up until we get the jig drilled out, and then we can't even build tabs until we get that bit. So we're kind of dead in the water until I get a 5/8 drill bit. So I'm just gonna call the episode there. It's a pretty short one, but it is what it is. So if you haven't already, guys, like and subscribe. Go check us out on Instagram, Leftfootfirst Media, and we'll see you next episode. I'm out of here.